Good evening, everybody. This is Lorraine, Alternative Homesteading. I'm going to continue discussing Trapped in a Black Box, Growing Terrorism Watch Listing and Everyday Policing, the 2016 study conducted by the ACLU based upon their FOIA requests of the FBI regarding the terrorist watch list. You know, that watch list that once you get placed on, you never get taken off. There's no due process, etc., etc. But anyway, I compiled, because it gets to be a little confusing when I'm reading it because of the abbreviation. So what I did was I spelled out the abbreviations here. I will post this as a thumbnail so you can go back to it and review it. So there is the Terrorist Review and Examination Unit, which is TREX. There is the Terrorist Screening Database, TSDB. The Terrorist Screening Center, TSC, which actually has the final decision-making process to send you to the Terrorist Screening Database. And once you get to the Terrorist Screening Database, here, let me just show you folks here. To the database, this then populates the KST, which is the known or suspected terrorist list. And what it does is, after it goes to the screening center, which pretty much has the final decision-making capacity, it gets sent to the terrorist screening database, which then populates the KST known or suspected terrorists and other databases. Okay? So, known or suspected terrorists are you and I. Anybody who's a targeted individual, you're going to be on that list. You're going to be on the terrorists. You're going to have gone through the terrorist screening database, which then makes the final decision to place you in the terrorist screening database, which then populates this database, the known or suspected terrorists. And then we'll go on to some of the other methods that they use. It's a little confusing. But then you've got here, okay, so you've got the National Counterterrorism Center. Counterterrorism is synonymous with domestic terrorism. And domestic terrorism is synonymous with targeted individuals, folks. But most of you know that already. Okay, so we're going to get on to, I'm on page 18. So we left off discussing the nomination process, the nomination procedures, but that was the previous methods. Now in here, it says the current nomination procedures and criteria are a little bit different. So as outlined in section 1, the current process for source agencies to nominate new entries is as follows. Now you have to remember, folks, this is 7 years old. It may have changed. Okay, so what happens is the source agency submits names to either the FBI, which is domestic terrorism, or the NCTC, which is international terrorism. Okay, so then the FBI or the NCTC reviews the nominations. The FBI or the NCTC submits approved names to the Terrorist Screening Database Center for inclusion in the database. Okay, so this is the process. So the FBI or the NCTC, now the NCTC is international terrorism, okay? So we're looking more at the domestic terrorism. FBI has control over the domestic terrorism. or the NCTC, which is international terrorism. So then the FBI reviews the nominations. They submit the approved names to the Terrorist Screening Center for inclusion in the Terrorist Screening Database. The TSC exports those entries to the downstream databases, including the KST, formerly VGTOF. Now, the VGTOF is the violent gangs, okay? They renamed it to the KST, which is known or suspected terrorists. You see that play on words, folks? It's no longer violent gangs. It's known or suspected terrorists. So then for entries that originate with an FBI field office, the nomination process is as follows. The FBI field office submits domestic and international nominations to TREX, which is the Terrorist Review and Examination Unit. TREX reviews the nominations. TREX sends the domestic nominations back to the TSC. And then the NCTC, the National Counterterrorism Center, enters the approved names into the TIDE database, which is then exported back to the Terrorist Screening Center. The TSC conducts a final review and imports all the approved entries back to the Terrorist Screening Database. The Terrorist Screening Database entries then flow to downstream databases, including the KST, known or suspected terrorists. Okay, folks? Nominations for included must meet a reasonable suspicion standard based upon articulable intelligence or information which, based on the totality of the facts, reasonably warrants a determination that the subject is known or is suspected to be or has been knowingly engaged in conduct constituting in preparation for, in aid of, or related to terrorism or terrorist activities. I'll give you an example, folks. When I cut my grass here on eastern Kentucky in my rural property, I have people zooming by, harassing me. I am a terrorist for cutting my grass. Or like in Manalapan, New Jersey, when I was called a terrorist threat for walking on my own driveway where I lived as original owner for 30 years, just because my newly installed perpetrator neighbor decided to call the police and fabricate a false report. And of course, none of my evidence was even considered. So this is how they nominate you for inclusion in the database. Nominated agencies are instructed to establish their own processes for ensuring the quality and accuracy of the nominations, and it is not clear how consistent or meaningful those agencies' quality control is. Surprise, surprise, folks. Does that surprise anybody? Doesn't surprise me. No entity ensures that the reasonable suspicion standard is consistently applied by nominating officers or analysts. As explained in greater detail below, the reasonable suspicion standard is deeply problematic for numerous reasons, including that it permits the use of uncorroborated or questionably reliable information, necessarily entails a significant risk of error, and makes it likely that individuals will be nominated for and included in the terrorist database and the known or suspected terrorist list based on conduct that is innocent or protected under First Amendment. It is not clear what, if any, guidelines govern the nominations or source agencies other than the FBI. Do you hear that, folks? The FBI is controlling the whole shebang. I'm going to repeat that sentence. It is not clear what, if any, guidelines govern the nominations of source agencies other than the FBI. According to a 2014 OIG report, however, 3 categories of individuals can be nominated by the FBI for inclusion in the KST file. 1. Subjects of full investigations. 2. Subjects of preliminary investigations. And 3. Non-investigative subjects. Full investigations are authorized when there are specific and articulable facts given reason to believe that a criminal activity or a threat to national security may exist. Yes, folks, I'm a threat to national security for walking on my driveway and cutting the grass with a riding lawnmower. Subjects of full investigation are presumed to meet the reasonable suspicion standard because of the FBI's internal criteria. Internal, keyword, the FBI's internal criteria for expanding a preliminary investigation to a full investigation. Oh, it sounds like a financial incentive to me, folks. What do you think? Preliminary investigations are authorized when there exists any allegation or information indicative of possible criminal activity or threats to the national security. Thus, the FBI initiates a preliminary investigation when it does not have enough evidence to meet the standard for a full investigation, and yet it may nevertheless nominate individuals under preliminary investigation for inclusion in the watch list. Indeed, subjects of preliminary investigations may not meet the reasonable suspicion standard for watch listing. As with the watch listing criteria, the FBI's guidelines for preliminary investigations are vague and overbroad, permitting intrusive investigations of people for lengthy periods, even when the government does not have facts to meet its own low reasonable indication standard for showing that anyone has violated the law. A third type of nomination, the non-investigative subject nomination, allows for the nomination of individuals who are not the subjects of an open FBI investigation, although the specific criteria for who may be nominated as non-investigative subjects are unclear. These nominations could include names that the FBI receives from foreign governments through legal attachés. Wait, I've got to plug in my phone, folks. I'm on low battery. I didn't realize it. Hold on 1 second, folks. I apologize. Okay, so the nomination could include names that the FBI receives from foreign governments through legal attachés or other agencies, such as the Drug Enforcement Agency. One document from the FOIA production describes non-investigative subject nominations by the FBI headquarters as individuals who are, quote unquote, on the radar, but not currently under investigation. A 2009 OIG report found that the review process for such nominations is weak or non-existent. Similarly, a 2014 report found that the FBI could not really provide an accurate accounting of the actions that were taken regarding the watch listing of non-investigative subjects. As the foregoing analysis makes clear, the FBI's watch listing practices for non-investigative subjects are ripe for abuse and permit the inclusion of names submitted by foreign governments, which may have their own reasons for seeking to watch list dissidents and opponents under standards that fall short of the FBI's already low threshold for nomination. The FBI's use of the reasonable suspicion standard is problematic for numerous reasons. First, reasonable suspicion, as used here, is a very low standard that can be met with uncorroborated or even questionably reliable information, and on its face does not require that it be more probable than not that an individual is involved in terrorism activities. Such a low threshold for nomination injects a significant risk of error into the nomination process and makes it likely that the individuals be nominated for and included in the terrorist screening database and known or suspected terrorist watch list based on conduct that is innocent or protected under the First Amendment. The 2013 watch listing guidance also includes numerous exceptions to the reasonable suspicion requirement that make it significantly easier to watch list non-citizens, leaving them particularly vulnerable to watch listing based on inaccurate, incomplete, or spurious information. Second, nominations do not always appear to undergo review to determine whether they actually meet the reasonable suspicion standard. This is especially alarming in light of the fact that the FBI field agents do not always understand the downstream effects of nominating an individual for entry into the terrorist screening database. Third, the nominations of preliminary investigative subjects and non-investigative subjects raise questions about how individuals who do not meet the criteria for a full investigation, that is, specific articulable facts, giving reason to believe a threat might exist, could nevertheless satisfy the definition of quote-unquote reasonable suspicion required for entry in the terrorist screening database, which is articulable intelligence and an objective factual basis. Fourth, the OIG report suggests that there has been no systematic review for whether the nominating field office correctly determined that the reasonable suspicion standard had been met. In 2007, the OIG noted that the TSC has been attempting a record-by-record audit review of watch list entries, but that the TSC was unlikely to finish the process before 2012. And it is not clear if the review was ever completed. In addition, it is not clear how meaningful the review process was. While the TSC's process in March 2006 included reviewing incoming records for a nexus to terrorism, review of existing records appeared limited to special targeted reviews of the no-fly list and other specific categories, as well as situations where an external encounter with a subject indicated that information would need to be added or changed. There are not systematic reviews of historical records for sufficiency to meet the reasonable suspicion standard. I'm sorry, it's tough. I'm tired. It's late. Fifth, there are a few external incentives for officials within the TSC and field offices to exercise caution when entering subjects according to reasonable suspicion standards. Because the information underlying watch listing entries is secret, and because there is no judicial review of watch listing decisions, officials do not have the same incentives as police officers who face the suppression of evidence if their determination of reasonable suspicion or probable cause is incorrect, to adhere carefully to applicable evidentiary standards. In addition, those with decision-making authority over watch list nominations may not fully understand the ramifications of placement on a watch list. Sixth and finally, although the 2013 watch listing guidance states that First Amendment protective activity alone shall not be the basis of nominating an individual for inclusion on the terrorist watch list, it is clear that the First Amendment protected activity may constitute part of the basis for inclusion in the terrorist screening database. And indeed, under the guidance, a single Facebook post, tweet, or anonymous letter may provide the reasonable suspicion necessary to watch list an individual. Did you hear that, folks? Did you hear that? I'm going to repeat that. It is clear that First Amendment protective activity may constitute part of the basis for inclusion in the terrorist screening database. And indeed, under the guidance, a single one Facebook post, tweet, or anonymous letter may provide the reasonable suspicion necessary to watch list an individual. You hear that, folks? Is this amazing? That somebody can be placed on this list forever to have their entire lives ruined because of an envious, jealous person sending an anonymous letter, one single tweet or Facebook post. It may not even be from you. It may be from somebody like the Gorilla Creep, who's adept at changing names and hacking. It might not even be you. Given these deficiencies in the nomination process and standard, it is perhaps unsurprising that even someone who has been exonerated after investigation or even prosecution can nevertheless remain on the watch list. An FBI document from 2009 explicitly states that individuals who have been acquitted of terrorism-related crimes and those charges have been dismissed can nevertheless remain on the watch list, provided that reasonable suspicion remains. Even when an FBI investigation has closed and the field office is theoretically required to submit a request to remove the individual from the watch list, the FBI case agent can petition to keep that individual on the watch list by nominating him or her as a non-investigative subject. In addition, individuals exonerated by an FBI investigation can remain in tide-based, unnominating agencies' independent determination that the individual is known or suspected terrorist, again, according to vague and overbroad criteria or under an exception to the reasonable suspicion standard. Is that unbelievable, folks? I'm going to fast forward a little bit because it goes into the encounter process, meaning, if you run into, police officer, whatever, law enforcement, the handling codes. One of the handling codes is, it'll say law enforcement sensitive information warning, approach with caution. This individual is associated with terrorism and is the subject of an arrest warrant. Although the warrant may not be retrievable via searched identifiers, if an arrest warrant for the individual is returned in your search of NCIC, detain the individual pursuant to your department's procedures for handling an outstanding warrant, and immediately contact the Terrorist Screening Center and gives a phone number. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit, folks. This is just absolutely horrific. Now we're going to go into silent hits. I know Jeff was asking about silent hits. The ACLU's FOIA litigation revealed for the first time the widespread and growing use of quote-unquote silent hits is a mechanism through which the FBI can keep tabs on individuals suspected of terrorism without notifying those individuals or local law enforcement offices who encounter them. Silent hit entries allow the FBI and other executive departments and agencies to track watch-listed individuals while withholding this information from the state and local law enforcement officials who encounter the individuals. Whenever local law enforcement encounters an individual with a silent hit entry, the FBI and sometimes other designated agencies will be automatically notified, but the local law enforcement officers will not. The use of silent hits has grown over time, and more agencies have gained the ability to nominate individuals for silent hits, as well as receive notifications of encounters. Because of their highly secret nature, silent hit nominations are subject to less procedural protections, and it is extremely difficult for individuals wrongly placed on the list to seek redress. The criteria for silent hit nominations: there is usually a directive from the Counterterrorism Division to all FBI field offices in the July 2006. It states that the subjects may be nominated as a silent hit entry in circumstances where the nominating official can articulate a specific, narrowly defined, and legitimate operational justification for requesting the silent hit. Is that amazing? This means that one of their best buddies who doesn't like you can call into the FBI office and state an articulate, specific, narrowly defined, legitimate operational justification for requesting the silent hit, like, hey, here's the $10,000. I just don't like that person. Get rid of her. Right? Let's cause her some problems. Let's just put her on a list for the rest of her life. Just because I don't like her. Just because she pissed me off. It would be subject of investigation as is the target of a 24/7 physical surveillance, undercover activities and operation, and undisclosed participation in organizations in conformity with FBI policy. 2. The subject is an employee, member, or is affiliated with a military, federal, state, local, or other law enforcement agency or any group that may have access to NCIC terminals or other unique operational circumstances in which a nominating official can articulate a reasonable and detailed justification why the subject should be included in the databases as a silent hit. So that's telling you here, folks, that somebody who works at the FBI, somebody who's friends with the FBI, someone affiliated with a military, federal, city, state, or local or other law enforcement agency or group that has access to the NCIC terminals can nominate you for a silent hit. A proviso is the same directive recognized that because of the fact that encountering officers are not alerted to silent hit entries raises officer safety issues. Subjects who have a violent nature or are known to be armed and dangerous should not be marked as silent hits. In order to ensure that those considered armed and dangerous are not listed as silent hits, internal guidelines from May 2008 stated that the officer safety information field of an individual must the entry must be null or blank for the records with an HC handling code of R or S. So that means if you see a police report with a handling code that says R or S, you will be one of those silent hit people. I'm going to just scroll down a little bit because they're talking if somebody has a weapons permit, concealed carry, is known to carry weapons on his person, etc., etc., etc. Expanding use. The records the ACLU obtained through FOIA indicate that the capability to utilize silent hits was originally intended to be temporary. Only CJIS could enter silent hit entries, and a local law enforcement officer query of a silent hit record prompted a notification only to the FBI headquarters. Around 2002, silent hits became permanent fixtures in the system, and the Office of Origin for a particular case gained the ability to receive notifications regarding that silent hit record. There is a graph here that's showing the total silent hit records. You see that, folks? The use of silent hits grew dramatically after their inception from 700 in 2003 to over 4,600 records by mid-2006. And so that's in 3 years. In 3 years, folks, it went from 700 to 4,600. And in the period from 2004 to 2008, silent hit records consistently made up between 1 to 3% of all records in the violent gangs database. This is crazy. Redress. The government does not confirm whether individuals who suspect they have been adversely affected by placement on a watch list are in fact watch listed. The procedure for challenging erroneous inclusion on the terrorist watch list is opaque, one-sided, and non-participatory. Individuals can submit complaints only if they come to suspect, through encounters with law enforcement officers or other government officials, that they are included on a watch list, and individuals cannot review or refute any information underlying their placement on the watch list. Individuals are not granted a hearing at which they could establish their credibility before a neutral decision maker, and individuals never receive a confirmation that erroneous information has been removed from a watch listed rated activity related files. So this is it, folks. There is no redress. It doesn't matter who placed you on the list. It doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter if there's evidence. It doesn't matter if it's fabricated evidence. It doesn't matter if it's false. There's no way out of it. That's why it's called trapped in a black box. Growing terrorism watch listing and everyday policing. But in 2007, agencies involved in the watch list process executed a redress memorandum of understanding to coordinate a redress process. When an individual files a redress complaint, the screening agency, the agency that conducted the terrorist screening, for example, at the airport, the TSC's redress office then determines whether the complaint is related to a terrorist database record, including whether the complainant is watch-listed individual or merely a near match to a watch-listed record. So what happens, folks, is let's say you're on the no-fly list and you go to board a plane and they're telling you, well, you can't fly because of X, Y, and Z. They're telling you right there that you have been watch-listed. So unless that happens to you, there really is no redress. I mean, I have heard of people challenging the no-fly list because it's obvious that you're not allowed to board a plane, and it's obvious that you've been placed on some kind of, some kind of database. And then the Department of Homeland Security's Travel Redress Inquiry Program is also related to watch list issues that arise during travel screening. That's at the airport and border controls. So in conclusion, folks, this white paper pieces together previously unknown details about the federal government's watch list by synthesizing public materials and FOIA documents obtained by the FBI. However, because the FOIA documents are not comprehensive and only provide information until 2009. Do you hear that, folks? This is only information up to 2009, even though it's written in 2016. A number of informational gaps remain. For example, the documents do not reveal the extent to which the information can be accessed by non-law enforcement agencies and at the state level, or even certain private entities, which could impact everything from bail determination and sentencing to employment prospects and access to a financial system. It's also unclear what criteria and procedures other agencies follow in nominating subjects and how rigorously those agencies review nominations or redress complaints. And despite the knowledge gaps, the available information on the watch list system leads to troubling conclusions. The system poses a serious threat to constitutional rights and civil liberties, as watch-listed individuals may be subject to unwarranted monitoring and surveillance, prolonged detention and questioning, the stigmatization that comes with such law enforcement scrutiny. In addition, watch-listed individuals face the risk of mistaken dissemination of terrorist watch list information to private third parties, like employees and insurance companies. They may also face discrimination in immigration and naturalization proceedings. Despite the threat to these individuals' due process and privacy rights, they have little recourse to challenge the watch listing procedures. Now, in here, it mentions nothing about the vandalism, the pet murder, the thefts, the home break-ins, the theft of personal property, directed energy weapons. It's merely stating that there is a watch list, several watch lists that you may be on, and once you get on, you never get off. There's no way to get off a list. And even if you are exonerated of a particular crime, you may still continue to be on the watch list. I'd like to hear your feedback, folks. This is Lorraine Alternative Homesteading. Thank you for listening. I look forward to your comments below and welcome newcomers. The last time I looked, we had 499 subscribers. I can't wait till we get to 500. And then we'll keep going up and spreading the news, spreading the word. Again, thank you for subscribing, and I welcome your comments down below.